A shocking proposal. Dr. David Richardson was known by everyone in the town. He was a wealthy, successful doctor, respected by his colleagues and admired by his patients. People looked up to him not just for his medical skills, but also for his sophisticated lifestyle. He owned a big house, drove a luxury car, and always attended fancy parties. No one ever expected that someone like him could fall in love with someone so different. One sunny afternoon, a shocking announcement was made that took the whole town by surprise. Dr. Richardson, the well-known doctor who had everything, was about to marry a woman with 5 children. Not just any woman, but a woman of color. Her name was Tanya Williams, a strong and loving mother who had spent most of her life raising her 5 kids on her own. Tanya was kind, hardworking, and a pillar of strength for her children, but her life had been far from easy. The news spread like wildfire. The town couldn't believe it. Dr. Richardson, a man who was seen as perfect in every way, was marrying a woman who lived a very different life. Tanya had never been part of the high society circles that Dr. Richardson was used to. She didn't wear expensive clothes or attend grand parties. She was a single mother, living in a modest house, doing her best to raise her children right. Many people in the town were quick to judge. Some said it was impossible for someone like Dr. Richardson to be truly happy with Tanya and her 5 kids. They whispered to each other, wondering what he saw in her. Does he really love her, or is he just trying to do something different? People asked in hushed tones, why would someone so rich and successful choose a life like that? As for Tanya, she knew the whispers were coming. She was used to judgment. She had always worked hard for her children and had learned to ignore the negativity around her. But this was different. This was big. The townspeople had always seen her as someone who had to struggle for everything. They didn't see her as a woman who had dreams, hopes, and a future. They saw her as a mother, yes, but also as someone who would never fit into the world of the wealthy. Tanya had never imagined she would marry a man like Dr. Richardson. In fact, when they first met, she hadn't expected anything to happen. He was just another patient at her clinic, someone she helped with his minor medical issues. Over time, they began talking more, and Dr. Richardson became a regular visitor. But he wasn't just interested in her medical skills. Slowly, Tanya began to notice something. He was different. He didn't care about the size of her house or the fact that she had 5 children. What he cared about was her heart, her strength, and her kindness. One day, during one of their conversations, Dr. Richardson asked her a question that would change both of their lives forever. Tanya, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Tanya couldn't believe her ears. Her heart raced. She had been thinking about him more and more, but she had never imagined that he would feel the same way. And now he was asking her to marry him. It was a shock, but it was also the happiest moment of her life. She had dreamed of a future, a better life for her kids, but she never expected it would come this way. Dr. Richardson didn't see her as just a mother of 5 kids. He saw her for who she truly was. He saw her strength, her beauty, her kindness. To him, she was more than enough. He didn't care about her background, her struggles, or her past. He loved her for the person she was, and that meant everything to Tanya. But as happy as Tanya was, she couldn't ignore the reality that awaited them. People would talk. People would question their decision. They would wonder why Dr. Richardson, a man with so much to lose, would marry someone like her. Tanya's 5 children, who were her whole world, were also going to be part of this new life. She didn't want to bring them into a situation where they would be treated differently, or worse, judged. The day of the announcement came, and Tanya stood by Dr. Richardson's side as he revealed the news. He had invited a few close friends and colleagues to a private gathering at his house. Tanya felt nervous, but Dr. Richardson squeezed her hand, reassuring her. "We're doing this together," he said. The room fell silent as he spoke. "I have an announcement to make," Dr. Richardson began. "I am getting married to Tanya Williams, and not only am I marrying her, but I am also welcoming her 5 beautiful children into my life. This is the person I love, and I want to build a life with her." There was a long pause. People exchanged shocked looks, and some even whispered to each other. It was clear that the news had shaken everyone. Tanya could feel the eyes on her, the judgment, the disbelief. She held her head high, but deep inside, she felt a mix of emotions. Excitement, fear, and uncertainty all collided inside her. Dr. Richardson smiled at her, his eyes filled with love and trust. He didn't care what the world thought. He had made his decision, and that decision was Tanya. But as they left the gathering, Tanya couldn't help but wonder, would the world accept them? Could their love survive the harsh judgment and whispers of society? The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. This was just the beginning of a journey neither of them had ever imagined. Judged by society. The days following the announcement were filled with both excitement and tension. Dr. Richardson and Tanya were overwhelmed by the reactions they received from their friends, family, and the community. Some people congratulated them, but most were not so kind. Their marriage seemed impossible to some, and many couldn't understand why a man like Dr. Richardson, with his wealth and success, would choose to marry a woman with 5 kids, especially one of a different race. As the couple walked through the streets, whispers followed them. Tanya could feel the cold stares, the eyes of strangers judging her. The children, though innocent, were also feeling the tension. They had always been close, a tight-knit family, but now the world was looking at them differently. They were no longer just Tanya's kids, they were the children of the wealthy doctor, and that came with its own set of expectations. At first, Tanya tried to ignore the harsh words and the stares. She had always faced criticism before. Being a single mother had never been easy, and she had learned to block out the negativity. But this was different. People who had once treated her with respect now acted as though she didn't belong in their world. Dr. Richardson tried to protect her as much as he could. He spoke to his friends and colleagues, explaining his love for Tanya and how much she meant to him. But the judgment didn't stop. It only seemed to grow. "She's just a single mother," people would say. How could he possibly marry someone like her? Some of his colleagues at the hospital made comments too. Dr. Richardson had always been well-liked at work, respected by his peers. But now, some of them seemed uncomfortable around him. "Is she really the right person for you?" they asked, not understanding why he would choose Tanya. "What about your life, your career? Doesn't she bring too much baggage?" Tanya heard these whispers, and although she tried to remain strong, the words stung. She loved Dr. Richardson, but she was beginning to wonder if their love was enough to overcome the world's judgment. One afternoon, as they walked out of the hospital together, Tanya saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Claire, one of Dr. Richardson's close friends. Claire smiled warmly at Tanya, but then glanced quickly at Dr. Richardson. "David, I hope you're not rushing into this," she said, her voice lower than usual. "You know, there are consequences to marrying someone like her. I just don't want you to regret this." Tanya felt a wave of anger rise within her. She had been trying to ignore the whispers, but hearing it straight from someone she thought of as a friend made her feel as if her whole world was crumbling. Claire wasn't the only one who thought this way. Many others had similar opinions, and they made Tanya feel like an outsider. It was as if they saw her as unworthy of being part of their world. Dr. Richardson noticed the hurt in Tanya's eyes. He immediately stood up to Claire. "I love Tanya. She's everything to me," he said firmly, his voice full of conviction. "If you can't understand that, then maybe this isn't the friendship I thought it was." Claire looked taken aback, but she didn't argue. She knew better than to challenge Dr. Richardson, especially when he spoke with such certainty. However, her words had already left an impact. Tanya felt a wave of doubt hit her. Would they ever be able to escape the judgment of others? Would Dr. Richardson's friends and colleagues ever truly accept her? At home, the tension only grew. Tanya sat with her children, trying to calm them down as they expressed their worries. "Mom, are we really going to be treated like this forever?" one of her sons asked. "Why do people hate us just because you're marrying Dr. Richardson?" Tanya tried to smile, but it was difficult. "People don't understand, sweetheart," she said softly. "They see us as different, but that doesn't mean we're wrong. We have a good family, and we have love. That's all that matters." But deep down, Tanya wasn't so sure. She felt torn. The love she and Dr. Richardson shared was real, but how long could they ignore the harsh words and cold stares? How much longer could they keep their heads held high while everyone around them doubted their relationship? Dr. Richardson, too, struggled. He wanted to protect Tanya and her children, but he couldn't change the world. No matter how much he loved her, no matter how much he tried to explain to others that he had made the right choice, it was clear that the world wasn't ready to accept their marriage. But despite all the negativity, Tanya refused to give up. She loved David with all her heart, and she knew that they had built something special together. She wouldn't let the judgment of others destroy it. One evening, after a particularly hard day, Tanya sat alone in the living room, looking out the window. She thought about all the challenges they had faced and all the ones still to come. The road ahead would be difficult, but she had made a promise to herself and to her children that she wouldn't let the opinions of others stop her from living her truth. As the sun set, Tanya stood up, feeling more determined than ever. She wouldn't let society's judgment break her. She was stronger than that, and so was Dr. Richardson. Together, they could face whatever came their way. The journey ahead would be hard, but Tanya was ready. She would protect her family, and she would fight for her love. No matter what the world thought, she knew they were meant to be together. The unexpected visitor. It had been a few weeks since the announcement, and the town's gossip had not slowed down. Tanya and Dr. Richardson had grown used to the whispers behind their backs, but it still stung every time they heard the judgmental remarks. It seemed like every step they took, someone was there to remind them how impossible their relationship was. Tanya had hoped that the public's judgment would fade, that people would eventually accept their love, but the harshness seemed to be growing stronger. Dr. Richardson kept telling her to ignore it, that their love was more important than what anyone thought. But Tanya was only human, and the negativity was starting to wear her down. One rainy afternoon, Tanya was at home, sitting with her children, trying to distract them from the world outside. The kids were watching TV in the living room, laughing and playing, but Tanya couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She'd been feeling restless all day, and she couldn't put her finger on why. The doorbell rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was an unusual time for visitors. Tanya stood up, brushing off the unease in her chest, and walked to the door. As she opened it, she was surprised to see a man standing on her doorstep, someone she had never seen before. The man was tall, with dark hair and a serious look on his face. He was dressed in a suit, but it was clear from the way he stood that he wasn't here for a social visit. Tanya hesitated, but before she could ask who he was, the man spoke. "Are you Tanya Williams?" he asked in a low voice. Tanya nodded slowly. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The man looked around cautiously, then stepped closer, lowering his voice further. "I'm an associate of Dr. David Richardson. I need to speak with you, urgently." Tanya's heart skipped a beat. Dr. Richardson. What was going on? She stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. As the man walked into the house, Tanya couldn't help but feel a knot form in her stomach. She had no idea what this was about, but the man's serious demeanor told her it wasn't good news. He looked around the house, as if making sure no one else could hear. "I'm afraid it's not good news," the man said, his voice grim. "Dr. Richardson is in trouble. There are people who are not happy about his marriage to you, and they are taking extreme measures." Tanya felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What kind of trouble?" The man hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "There's a group of people who don't want your relationship to succeed. They're spreading rumors, trying to make things difficult for Dr. Richardson, trying to drive a wedge between you two. Tanya's mind raced. She had heard the whispers, the cold stares, but she didn't realize how deep the animosity ran. "Why didn't Dr. Richardson tell me about this?" she asked, feeling a mixture of anger and worry. "He didn't want to worry you," the man said. "But it's getting serious. These people are not just talking anymore. They're making moves to destroy his reputation. And by association, they're trying to tear apart your relationship too." Tanya's hands trembled slightly as she processed what he was saying. She had always known that people had judged them, but she never thought anyone would go this far. "What do you want me to do?" Tanya asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I just wanted to warn you," the man said. "You need to be careful. There will be more people coming, and they'll try to find ways to hurt you both. You need to be prepared." Before Tanya could say anything more, the man turned and left as quickly as he had arrived, disappearing into the rain. Tanya stood in the doorway for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She felt numb, as if the world had just shifted beneath her feet. She took a deep breath and stepped back into the house. Her children were still in the living room, unaware of what had just transpired. Tanya walked over to them and sat down. They looked at her with questioning eyes, sensing something was wrong. "Mom, what happened?" one of her daughters asked, noticing the serious look on her face. Tanya forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetie. Just some news from Dr. Richardson's work. Everything's fine." But inside, Tanya was anything but fine. The weight of what the man had said lingered in her mind. There were people out there who were willing to go to extreme lengths to tear apart her relationship with David. People who would stop at nothing to destroy what they had. Tanya felt a mixture of anger and fear. She had known that society would judge them. But this was something completely different. This wasn't just gossip or disapproval. This was an organized attack on their love. Whoever these people were, they were determined to break them apart. She couldn't let that happen. Tanya loved Dr. Richardson, and she wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how powerful or influential, destroy what they had built together. She knew the road ahead would be even more difficult, but she was ready to fight. For herself, for her children, for her love. The next morning, Tanya called Dr. Richardson to tell him about the visit. His reaction was one of concern, but also determination. "We knew this was coming, Tanya," he said. "There will always be people who don't understand us, but we can't let them win. We have to stand strong. Together." Tanya nodded, feeling the strength of his words. Together, they would face whatever came their way, side by side. But as Tanya hung up the phone, a sense of unease washed over her again. Who were these people who wanted to tear them apart? And how far would they go to destroy their love? The danger was real, and Tanya knew that the fight for their happiness was only just beginning. "He didn't want to worry you," the man said, "but it's getting serious. These people are not just talking anymore. They're making moves to destroy his reputation. And by association, they're trying to tear apart your relationship too." Tanya's hands trembled slightly as she processed what he was saying. She had always known that people had judged them, but she never thought anyone would go this far. "What do you want me to do?" Tanya asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I just wanted to warn you," the man said. "You need to be careful. There will be more people coming, and they'll try to find ways to hurt you both. You need to be prepared." Before Tanya could say anything more, the man turned and left as quickly as he had arrived, disappearing into the rain. Tanya stood in the doorway for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She felt numb, as if the world had just shifted beneath her feet. She took a deep breath and stepped back into the house. Her children were still in the living room, unaware of what had just transpired. Tanya walked over to them and sat down. They looked at her with questioning eyes, sensing something was wrong. "Mom, what happened?" one of her daughters asked, noticing the serious look on her face. Tanya forced a smile. Nothing, sweetie. Just some news from Dr. Richardson's work. Everything's fine. But inside, Tanya was anything but fine. The weight of what the man had said lingered in her mind. There were people out there who were willing to go to extreme lengths to tear apart her relationship with David. People who would stop at nothing to destroy what they had. Tanya felt a mixture of anger and fear. She had known that society would judge them. But this was something completely different. This wasn't just gossip or disapproval. This was an organized attack on their love. Whoever these people were, they were determined to break them apart. She couldn't let that happen. Tanya loved Dr. Richardson, and she wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how powerful or influential, destroy what they had built together. She knew the road ahead would be even more difficult, but she was ready to fight. For herself, for her children, for her love. The next morning, Tanya called Dr. Richardson to tell him about the visit. His reaction was one of concern, but also determination. "We knew this was coming, Tanya," he said. "There will always be people who don't understand us, but we can't let them win. We have to stand strong. Together." Tanya nodded, feeling the strength of his words. Together, they would face whatever came their way, side by side. But as Tanya hung up the phone, a sense of unease washed over her again. Who were these people who wanted to tear them apart? And how far would they go to destroy their love? The danger was real, and Tanya knew that the fight for their happiness was only just beginning. The dark secrets unfold. Tanya couldn't shake the chilling warning she had received from the mysterious man. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his serious face, heard his words echoing in her mind. "There are people trying to tear you apart." It was clear now that the gossip and judgment weren't just isolated incidents. Someone, or some group, was actively working to destroy her relationship with Dr. Richardson. But who were they? And why would they go to such lengths to hurt them? As the days passed, the weight of the situation grew heavier. Tanya spent her days with the kids, trying to keep up appearances, to maintain some normalcy. But the worry and uncertainty were impossible to ignore. She noticed small things, strange looks when she left the house, unmarked cars parked near her street, and more whispers when she walked through the local shops. The tension was palpable, and Tanya could feel herself growing more and more isolated. Dr. Richardson had been trying to reassure her, but even he was starting to feel the pressure. At work, things were no longer the same. He had always been a respected figure in the medical community, but now his colleagues were distancing themselves. The whispers in the halls were louder, and the looks were colder. He could sense the disapproval, even from people he had once considered friends. One afternoon, Dr. Richardson sat Tanya down at their kitchen table, his face more serious than she had ever seen it. "Tanya, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. She nodded, her heart racing. She had known that things weren't right, but hearing the concern in his voice made her stomach twist with unease. "There's something you need to know," Dr. Richardson began, his eyes focused on her. "I've been looking into this. The people who are behind all of this, they're not just random strangers. They have a purpose, a reason for wanting to break us apart." Tanya's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Who are they?" Dr. Richardson hesitated, as if he wasn't sure how much he should reveal. But he knew he couldn't keep this from her any longer. "There's a group of powerful individuals who are threatened by the idea of our marriage. They don't want to see a black woman, especially one with 5 children, married to someone like me. They believe it goes against everything they stand for, and they'll stop at nothing to tear us apart." Tanya's heart sank. She had known there was opposition, but she hadn't realized the depth of it. These weren't just random individuals or jealous colleagues. They were organized, with a clear agenda. "But why?" Tanya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would they care about us so much? What do we have that's so threatening to them?" Dr. Richardson took a deep breath. "It's not just about us. It's about what we represent. They see our marriage as a challenge to everything they believe in: racism, classism, and the old ways of thinking. They can't stand the idea of a successful man like me choosing to marry someone like you. They think it sends the wrong message." Tanya's mind was spinning. She had never imagined that their love, her love for David, could be so threatening to other people. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. In a world where people were still judged by the color of their skin and the number of children they had, their union was a symbol of something much bigger than themselves. It was a symbol of love overcoming obstacles, of defying societal norms. And there were people who didn't want that message to spread. "You're telling me that this group is targeting us because of what? Because we love each other?" Tanya's voice shook with disbelief. "Yes," Dr. Richardson said, "and it's only going to get worse. They'll do anything to destroy our reputation, to ruin everything we've built together." Tanya felt a knot tighten in her chest. This was real. It wasn't just gossip or misunderstandings. It was a deliberate attack. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that they had been carefully watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every negative comment, every whispered judgment, had been part of a larger plan. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Tanya's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, looking at Dr. Richardson, who seemed just as uneasy. "Who could that be?" Tanya asked, but she already knew. Deep down, she feared the worst. She opened the door, and her breath caught in her throat when she saw who stood there. It was Claire, Dr. Richardson's old friend. But there was something different about her now. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't offering the warm greeting Tanya had come to expect. "I need to talk to you," Claire said, her voice tense. "It's important." Tanya stepped aside, letting Claire into the house. Her heart was racing. What was going on? Why was Claire here now? As Claire sat down at the kitchen table, she glanced nervously at Dr. Richardson. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been hearing things," she began. "Things that don't sit right with me." Tanya exchanged a confused look with David. "What do you mean?" Tanya asked. Claire hesitated before speaking. "I've been hearing about the group that's targeting you. They'd been spreading rumors, digging into your past, trying to find something that will hurt you both. And I think I might know who they are." Tanya's breath caught in her throat. Who are they?" Claire leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the people who used to be part of Dr. Richardson's life, his old colleagues, people he used to trust. They've been watching you, Tanya. They've been planning this for a long time." Tanya's blood ran cold. This was no longer just about society's judgment. This was personal. There were people who knew Dr. Richardson intimately, people he trusted, who were now working against him, against them. "Why are they doing this?" Tanya asked, her voice trembling with anger. "Why would they want to tear us apart?" Claire looked guilty, her eyes filled with regret. "Because they can't stand the idea of you, Tanya, of what you represent. And David, they've never forgiven him for going against them, for marrying you. They'll stop at nothing to destroy you both." The room fell silent. Tanya could barely process what Claire had just revealed. They weren't just fighting against strangers. They were fighting against the very people who had once been part of their lives. Tanya stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "We can't let them win," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll fight, together." David stood up, walking over to her. "We'll face this head-on," he said, "no matter what they throw at us." The battle was just beginning. Tanya and Dr. Richardson had been prepared for the world's judgment, but they hadn't realized how deep the betrayal ran. Now they had no choice but to fight back, to protect their love and their family from the shadows that threatened to tear them apart. The battle begins. Tanya had never imagined that their love would become the battlefield for so many forces. The fear, the doubt, and the betrayal that surrounded them were suffocating, but she knew there was no turning back now. With the truth out in the open, and the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on them, it was time to take a stand. David had always been calm and collected, But Tanya could see the fire burning in his eyes now. The quiet strength he had shown through all the hardship was beginning to turn into something stronger, something unyielding. He wasn't going to let these people destroy everything they had built. Not without a fight. As the days passed, Tanya felt the walls closing in around them. Dr. Richardson's colleagues began to pull away, their whispers more evident with every passing moment. Some of them even began to avoid him, knowing the rumors swirling about their relationship. The once strong bond that he had as colleagues was crumbling, and Tanya could feel the distance between them growing. But it wasn't just his colleagues. Their neighbors, the people they once saw every day, now avoided them as well. Some of the parents at the kids' school started whispering behind their backs. They could feel the judgment in every glance. It was a slow poison that was beginning to take root, and it hurt. But Tanya wasn't going to let it define them. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Tanya sat with David in their living room, a place that once felt like home, but now felt like a war zone. He was pacing back and forth, his mind clearly racing. Tanya could see the weight of the situation on him, but she also saw something else, the resolve to protect her, to protect their family. "David, we can't do this alone," Tanya said quietly, her voice firm. She knew what needed to be done, but they couldn't fight this battle without help. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his face set in determination. "I know. We need to find out who's behind this and what they want, and we need to be prepared. They won't stop until they've torn us apart, but I'm not going to let that happen." Tanya nodded, her heart pounding. They had to act fast. They needed information, allies, and a plan. But most importantly, they needed to stay united. In times like this, trust was the only thing they could hold on to. The next day, Dr. Richardson made a bold decision. He reached out to Claire, his old friend, and asked her to help. Tanya was unsure at first. After all, Claire had been part of their lives long before this all began. But Tanya had seen the guilt in her eyes, and she knew that Claire wanted to make things right. They arranged to meet at a small cafe, a place that used to be a sanctuary for them. Tanya and David arrived first, their eyes scanning the room, cautious but hopeful. When Claire finally walked in, her face was drawn with worry. She was clearly conflicted, but she was also determined to help them. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this from them," Claire said as she sat down. "But I'll do what I can. The people behind this, they're dangerous. They've been planning this for months, maybe even longer. It's not just about your marriage. It's about control." Tanya's heart sank. "Control?" she asked. Claire nodded. "These people want to keep power. They want to maintain their hold over the medical community, over society. David's decision to marry you, Tanya, has shaken that foundation. They see it as a threat to everything they've worked for, and they'll do anything to destroy it." David clenched his jaw, anger flashing in his eyes. "What exactly are we up against here? Who are these people?" Claire hesitated, looking around nervously before leaning in closer. "It's not just colleagues or rivals. It's higher up than that. The people pulling the strings are wealthy, influential individuals who want to maintain the status quo. They have connections everywhere. In politics, business, even law enforcement. They'll use every tool at their disposal to take you down." Tanya's blood ran cold. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. They weren't just facing a few jealous doctors or angry neighbors. This was an organized effort to ruin them, to destroy their family. It was a web of power and influence, and they were trapped in the middle. But there was no going back. Tanya knew that. She couldn't walk away from David, from their kids. She couldn't let this group tear apart everything they had worked for. "So what do we do now?" Tanya asked, her voice shaking but determined. Claire took a deep breath. "We need to fight back. We can't do this alone, but we can't just sit here and wait for them to destroy us. We need to expose them, gather evidence, and make sure they can't silence us." David nodded, his mind working quickly. "We'll get the truth out. We'll find their weaknesses and use them against them. The plan was simple but dangerous. They had to dig deeper into the group that was targeting them. They needed to gather evidence, find out who was behind the smear campaign, and expose them to the public. It was risky, but they had no other choice. That night, Tanya lay awake in bed, her thoughts racing. She couldn't sleep. The weight of everything they had learned was heavy on her chest. But there was no turning back now. She had made her decision. She would stand by David, no matter what. As the days passed, the battle escalated. The whispers grew louder, the attacks more personal. But Tanya and David were ready. They had their plan, and they weren't going to let these people destroy their lives without a fight. They were a family, and nothing, no one, could break them. Tanya's heart hardened with each passing day. The fight had only just begun, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would expose the truth. Together, they would survive. The truth uncovered. The stakes had never been higher. Tanya and David were standing on the edge, the weight of everything they had learned pressing down on them like a storm cloud. The walls had already started to close in, but now they had a plan. With Claire's help, they were ready to uncover the truth behind the conspiracy and expose the people who had been trying to tear their world apart. Every day, they gathered pieces of the puzzle, and the picture it formed was more disturbing than they had ever imagined. Claire had managed to dig into some of the names on the list, individuals who had been silently watching David's career for years. But now, they were moving quickly. The stakes were becoming personal, and they were running out of time. As they prepared to confront those responsible, Tanya couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and determination. The whispers had turned into a loud roar, and the public scrutiny was more intense than ever. Their family's life was on display for everyone to judge, and all of them, the kids, the friends, the people who had been there for years, were watching the drama unfold. It was a terrifying reality. One evening, David sat Tanya down after the kids had gone to bed. His expression was serious, his eyes tired but resolute. "We've got to act now," he said. "I've been talking to some trusted colleagues. They've been pushing back against this group, but they're scared. They don't want to lose their jobs, their status. But we can't let them do this." Tanya nodded. She understood. She had always known that their love was going to face challenges, but never like this. Never this extreme. "But how can we stop them?" she asked. "They have power, influence, everything we don't. I don't want to lose you, David." David's eyes softened. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. "We won't lose each other, Tanya. We've already lost so much, but I'm not going to let them take this from us. We'll expose them for who they are. We'll make sure that their secrets are out in the open." Tanya could see the fire in his eyes, the fierce love he had for her, and for their children. It was a reminder of why they were doing this. They weren't just fighting for their own future, but for the future of their family. For their kids, for their happiness, for everything they had worked so hard to build. The following days were a whirlwind of action. David and Tanya worked together with Claire, gathering evidence, digging deeper into the conspiracy. They found more details about the individuals behind the attacks, people who had financial stakes in keeping their world divided, people who felt threatened by David's marriage to Tanya, a black woman with 5 children. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. The conspiracy was bigger than just a few jealous doctors or angry colleagues. It was a network of people with deep ties to the elite, individuals who had their own agendas. The truth was buried beneath layers of secrecy, but they were determined to bring it to light. One night, David came home late, his face pale. "Tanya," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I found something. Something big." Tanya stood up, fear running through her. "What is it?" she asked, her heart racing. David walked over to the table, placing a folder in front of her. This is the evidence we need to bring them down." Tanya opened the folder, and what she saw took her breath away. Inside were documents, emails, and recordings, proof of the corruption that had been hidden for so long. It was everything they had suspected and more. The people who had been trying to destroy their lives weren't just targeting them because of their marriage. They were part of a larger scheme to control the medical industry, to control power in ways that no one had ever realized. "This is it," Tanya whispered, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "We have them. We can stop this." David nodded. "But we have to act fast. If we go public with this, there's no turning back. They'll come after us harder than ever before." Tanya felt her heart race, a cold chill running down her spine. She understood the danger, but she also knew that this was their only chance. The longer they waited, the more power the enemy would have. The next day, they took the evidence to their lawyer, a trusted friend who had been with them for years. He was shocked by what they had uncovered, but he was also eager to help. Together, they formed a plan to go public with the truth, to expose the corruption, and to fight back against those who wanted to see their family destroyed. As they prepared to make the truth known, Tanya's mind raced with questions. Would it be enough to stop them? Could they really go up against a group this powerful? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain: they couldn't back down now. The next few days were tense. Tanya and David knew that the moment they went public, their lives would be changed forever. There was no going back. But the risks were worth it. If they didn't expose the truth, the conspiracy would continue to grow, and more families would be torn apart. On the night before they were scheduled to release the information, Tanya and David sat together in their living room. The weight of the world seemed to hang over them. Tanya looked at David, her heart full of both fear and determination. "We can do this, right?" she asked quietly. David smiled at her, his eyes filled with love. "We have to. For our kids, for our future, for everything we believe in." Tanya nodded, her hand finding his. She knew it was true. They were stronger together. No matter what came next, they would face it as a family. And no matter how difficult the battle, they would never stop fighting for what they loved. The storm was about to break, but they were ready to face whatever came their way. The truth was about to be exposed, and with it, the chance to change everything. The final showdown. The day had arrived. Tanya and David stood together, side by side, facing a future they could no longer control, but determined to shape. Everything they had uncovered, the corruption, the conspiracy, the forces working to destroy their family, was now in the public eye. The weight of their decisions was heavy, but their resolve was stronger than ever. Tanya paced nervously in their living room, her mind racing with what was about to unfold. The entire world would soon know the truth, and with it their lives would be turned upside down. But there was no turning back. They had fought too long, uncovered too much, to let this go now. David sat calmly, his expression unreadable. The man who had always been a rock, the man who had walked into her life and changed everything, was now facing the storm with the same unwavering strength. "We've come this far," he said quietly, his voice filled with certainty. "There's no other choice now." Tanya nodded, trying to calm the storm inside her. "But what if they come after us? What if this isn't enough to bring them down?" David reached for her hand, his touch reassuring. "We've already won. We've exposed the truth. The people who've been pulling the strings, hiding in the shadows, they're out in the open now. That's all we can do. And when the world sees what they've been hiding, they won't have the power anymore." Tanya didn't feel entirely reassured, but she understood what he meant. The truth was out there. Their enemies might have power, but now they were exposed. The public had seen the emails, the recordings, the lies. The web of corruption was laid bare, and there was no hiding it anymore. Just as they were preparing to head to the press conference, Claire called. Her voice was tense but determined. "David, Tanya, it's happening. The media is already buzzing. They're all waiting for you to make your move. It's now or never." Tanya took a deep breath. "We're ready." Together, they arrived at the press conference, a sea of reporters and cameras awaiting them. Tanya could feel the weight of their gazes, the scrutiny in the air. For the first time, she wasn't sure if the room was filled with curiosity or judgment. They were walking into the lion's den, but they were determined to tell their story. They were going to take control of their narrative. David stepped to the podium first, his voice steady but firm. "Good afternoon," he began. "What we have to say today is not easy, but it is necessary. For months now, we've been the targets of a malicious campaign. This attack has been personal and public, but what we've uncovered is even more disturbing. There is a network of individuals who have been using their power and influence to manipulate our lives, and not just our lives, but the lives of countless others." The room was silent as David continued. He spoke of the conspiracy that had been revealed, the people behind it, and the way they had tried to tear his marriage apart. Every word he spoke felt like it carried the weight of years of frustration, pain, and determination. Tanya stood beside him, her heart racing, but her mind clear. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about everyone who had been hurt by these people, everyone who had suffered in silence. As David spoke, Tanya's gaze shifted to the reporters in the room, their faces a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. She knew that the truth was hard to swallow, but it had to be said. "These people thought they could control us," David continued, his voice growing stronger. "But they were wrong. No one controls us. No one controls my family." The reporters shifted in their seats, some typing furiously on their phones, others exchanging whispers. Tanya's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her ground. This was their moment. David finished his speech, and the questions began. Reporters fired questions at him, demanding answers. Some of them tried to discredit him, to question his motives, but David answered each one calmly and with conviction. He didn't back down. And then came the moment. One of the reporters, a familiar face from the beginning of the media frenzy, asked the question that everyone had been waiting for. "Dr. David, do you regret your marriage to Tanya? Do you regret the decision to marry a black woman with 5 children? What does this mean for your career?" David's expression hardened, and Tanya could feel the tension in the room. It was the question they had been dreading. But David stood tall, unwavering. "I don't regret a single thing about my marriage to Tanya," he said firmly. "My wife and my children are everything to me. And the only thing I regret is that it took me this long to see the truth, to see the hate and the fear that some people want to spread. But it ends now." The room was still. No one spoke for a moment, but the weight of David's words hung in the air. The reporters were taken aback. The truth had hit them hard, and it was undeniable. As the press conference ended and they walked out of the building, Tanya and David could feel the shift. They had spoken their truth, and now the world knew. The conspiracy they had uncovered, the people who had tried to destroy their lives, they were finished. The power they once held was now broken, but the battle wasn't over. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be more challenges, more battles to fight. But together, they could face anything. They had each other, and they had the truth. As they walked hand in hand toward their car, Tanya turned to David. "We did it," she whispered, a smile tugging at her lips. David squeezed her hand. "No, Tanya, we're doing it. Together." And as they drove off into the future, one thing was certain. No matter what came next, they had already won the most important battle of all.